When a person reaches $100,000 for the first time, he usually thinks the hard part is behind him. That is not quite right. The first 100,000 is the hardest mountain to climb. Yes, Charlie Munger said as much, and he was right. He understood that the first 6 figures demand discipline before they offer momentum. In that early climb, you are doing nearly all the lifting yourself. You are learning how to earn, how to keep what you earn, how to avoid stupid leaks, how to tell your appetite, know when the world keeps saying yes, and how to continue showing up when the account is too small to impress anyone, including you. That first stage is brutal because your money is not yet helping you very much. You are the engine, you are the worker. You are the one fighting habit, ego, temptation, comparison, and all the little cultural lies that tell you money is for looking successful before it is for becoming secure. But once you cross 100,000, the nature of the problem changes. The hard climb is not over. It simply becomes a different climb. Now, the real danger is not that you cannot build. The real danger is that you finally have something meaningful, and you begin behaving as though the existence of the money itself is proof that the discipline can relax. That is where many people lose years. They celebrate too early. They let the account balance talk them into a new version of themselves before the structure underneath their life is strong enough to support it. They look at the 6 figures and think, now I can breathe. Then they start upgrading the very system that created the 6 figures. And slowly, almost politely, the machine that was supposed to build real wealth gets replaced by a machine that only funds appearance. I have seen that pattern for decades. A man spends years skipping what other people call normal. He drives the old car, he keeps the apartment that is fine instead of chasing the house that flatters the ego. He cooks more often than he eats out. He puts money away before he spends on entertainment. He says no to trips, gadgets, memberships, and all the little things that seem harmless but are not harmless when stacked month after month. Then one day he wakes up and sees $100,000 in cash, investments, or some combination of both. The number feels magical. It feels like arrival. It feels like proof that the years of restraint were worth something. And because it feels that way, his mind starts whispering the most dangerous sentence in personal finance. You deserve to loosen up now. That sentence has destroyed more futures than market corrections ever did. People think the market is the main enemy because the market is visible. It flashes red. It moves violently. It produces headlines. Lifestyle inflation rarely produces headlines. It just quietly takes over the monthly budget. The man who once drove the old reliable car now decides a nicer one is justified. Not crazy, just nicer. He earns it after all. Then the apartment feels small. Then the clothes start looking behind the current version of success. Then dinner becomes a little more frequent, travel a little more upgraded, the small recurring subscriptions a little more numerous, the gifts a little more generous, the standards a little more luxurious, the expectations a little more expensive. Nothing feels reckless in isolation. That is why it is so dangerous. Financial destruction for ordinary people rarely arrives as one giant stupid purchase. It arrives as a smooth sequence of defensible upgrades. A person does not wake up and decide to become financially weak. He simply keeps raising the cost of being himself. Then one day his income is higher than ever. His account once touched a meaningful threshold, and somehow he feels more trapped than he did before. That is the contradiction the world never explains well. A person can hit $100,000 and still build no real freedom at all if the next move is to raise his fixed cost rather than his asset base. That is why I say the first 6 figures are not the finish line. They are a crossroads. One direction leads to compounding. The other leads to expensive normality. Compounding begins only when you protect the system that created the first 100 and direct the next dollars into structures that work while you sleep. Expensive normality begins when the money becomes permission rather than capital. I want to say something else plainly, because people hear wealth and assume consumption. Wealth is not mainly about buying things. That misunderstanding ruins millions of lives. Wealth is about options. Wealth is about time. Wealth is about the ability to tell a bad boss no, to survive a rough year without panic, to help the people you love without collapsing yourself, to step away from work for a season. If health or family demands it, to sleep without your chest tightening. Every time the car makes a new sound or a child says we need to talk, that is what wealth is for. The point is not to look upgraded. The point is to become hard to corner. And if $100,000 does not make you harder to corner because you immediately expand the lifestyle around it, then you have not turned savings into strength. You have only created a slightly more expensive version of your old vulnerability. Charlie understood the first stage very well. He knew that the first 100 was ugly because you are still fighting gravity. He joked about doing it the hard way, walking everywhere, using coupons, whatever it takes. People laugh when they hear that because it sounds severe. I do not laugh. I hear the deeper lesson. The first meaningful pile of money is built not by elegance but by force of behavior. And force of behavior should not be abandoned the minute it starts working. Now let me tell you what I think should happen after that first 100,000. The first rule is simple. Do not let the account balance become a reason to copy the spending habits of people you once privately knew were making mistakes. That sounds obvious until success starts flattering you. Many people in their 20s cannot afford to imitate foolish spending, so they remain accidentally disciplined. That is why Noah Damsky made such a sharp point about the old junky car. In your 20s, you may keep driving it because you have no choice. In your 30s or 40s, you may finally have enough money to replace it easily. At that point, the hard part is not affording the new car. The hard part is refusing to buy it simply because you can. That is a real test. When deprivation forces discipline, there is no special virtue in it. When abundance arrives and discipline stays anyway, now you are looking at someone who may actually build something serious. People do not separate these two forms of restraint clearly enough. The first is circumstantial. The second is chosen. Chosen restraint is one of the most powerful wealth-building skills on earth because it preserves the surplus that later becomes freedom. If you spend the entire increase each time your income rises or your balance crosses a milestone, then all you have really built is a bigger appetite. The world will cheer that. The market will not reward it. The second rule is to clean up the balance sheet before you start pretending you are an investor of unusual sophistication. If there is still high-interest consumer debt hanging around, kill it. I do not care how excited you are about the market. I do not care what a clever person on the internet said about average annual returns. There is no sense earning 10% in stocks while paying 16 or 20% to a credit card company. That is not investing. That is volunteering for financial confusion. High-interest debt must be handled first because it compounds against you relentlessly. It is the rare area of finance where emotion and mathematics mostly agree. The debt is ugly, it is expensive, it should go. The first 100,000 can make people weirdly overconfident here. They say, now that I have money, I can keep a few balances around and invest instead. If the debt is expensive, it is not part of a strategy, it is a leak. Seal the leak before you congratulate yourself on how much water you are carrying. And once the high-interest debt is gone, never return to it. That second part matters as much as the payoff itself because many households do not have a debt problem. They have a spending system problem that repeatedly expresses itself through debt. If the behaviors remain unchanged, the balance will come back wearing different purchases. The third rule is to build and protect a real emergency fund, not a symbolic one. Not the kind that sounds nice when repeated in a podcast summary. A real one, 3 to 6 months of living expenses in liquid form, is not dramatic. It is not glamorous. It is not the sort of thing anyone boasts about at dinner. It is one of the strongest signs that a household understands what money is for. The person with reserves walks through life differently. He does not need the market to cooperate this month. He does not need the boss to behave this quarter. He does not need the next paycheck to arrive at the perfect moment. He has room. And room is one of the rarest luxuries in modern life. People underestimate how much cognitive strength comes from financial buffers. Scarcity narrows the mind. I have seen that in business, in personal life, in investing, and in the behavior of otherwise smart people under stress. When every surprise is a crisis, judgment suffers. The brain begins thinking in the next bill, the next Friday, the next emergency. It loses strategic distance. An emergency fund buys strategic distance. It tells life, you may inconvenience me, but you may not own me, that matters. And because it matters, I want the reserve somewhere safe and liquid. High-yield savings accounts, money market funds, short-term treasury exposure. If you understand the mechanics, the point is not to maximize return on the emergency money. The point is to keep it accessible, safe, and earning something better than a checking account that insults your intelligence. After the debt is handled and the reserve is built, then the real compounding work begins. And here is where I want people to become boring. Boring is underrated. The ordinary investor keeps looking for the move that will make the money feel alive. The better move is the one that lets the money grow without requiring you to audition for brilliance. A low-cost broad. Market index fund is one of the finest tools ever created for ordinary people who want extraordinary long-term results without turning investing into a theater production. The market as a whole is an adaptive machine. Companies rise, companies fall, winners expand, losers shrink. Innovation happens. Old leaders fade. New leaders emerge. If you own the broad market at low cost, you own the system rather than trying to guess the next chapter by force. That is a much better bargain than most people realize. The first 100,000 should make you humbler, not more adventurous. Why? Because the very fact that you built it proves you already know the right behaviors. Earn, save, delay gratification, avoid foolishness, repeat. Why would you abandon the exact behaviors that work just because the number became large enough to make you emotional? The right response to early success is not complexity. It is scale, do more of what worked, automate more contributions, raise the investment percentage, expand the base, keep fees microscopic, let ownership grow. That is how the second 100 comes faster than the first. Not through drama, through multiplication. Now let me say something about tax-advantaged accounts, because many people do not understand how much this matters. A dollar saved in taxes is not simply a dollar retained. It is a dollar that remains inside the compounding machine instead of being removed from it. That distinction becomes enormous over time. Employer 401k matches, Roth accounts where appropriate, traditional retirement accounts, HSAs where relevant, all of these matter because they improve the structure inside which the money works. The person who ignores the employer match is making one of the dumbest common mistakes in finance. A match is free money in the clearest form most people will ever see, yet some skip it because they are busy chasing slightly more exciting ideas or because they still have not built the habit of paying the future self first. I dislike that phrase sometimes because it sounds like greeting card finance, but in this case it is exactly right. Future you must get paid first, not when there is extra left, not after the vacation, not after the holiday spending, not once the market finally feels safe first. That is how serious people build serious results. The next important change after 100,000 is mental. You must stop thinking in months and quarters and start thinking in decades. Most broke or nearly broke people are forced into short time horizons. How do I pay rent? How do I cover groceries? How do I survive until the next paycheck? That is understandable. But once you have capital, even modest capital, the mind must evolve. What am I building over 10 years? What am I building over 20 years? What kind of financial structure will make my 50s, 60s, and 70s feel calm rather than reactive? How much of my current spending is really just vanity disguised as adulthood? What level of recurring costs turns my income into a trap instead of a tool? These are better questions. And 100,000 is usually the first level at which those questions can stop being theoretical and start becoming practical. I want to say something about goals too, because vague money is badly managed money. A lot of people say they want to be rich. That means almost nothing. What do you actually want? A home, the ability to leave a high-stress job, the ability to retire early, the ability to help parents, the ability to travel for months, the ability to start a business without begging investors, the ability to raise children without every expense feeling like a wound. Wealth is not the goal. Wealth is the enabling force that matters, because the person who knows what the money is for can say no much more easily than the person who simply wants more money in the abstract. If your money has no mission, temptation wins. The car becomes easier to justify. The apartment upgrade becomes easier to justify. The trip becomes easier to justify. The friend group becomes easier to follow. Everything looks defensible if there is no counterweight called purpose. Purpose is one of the strongest forms of restraint. Not because it makes you austere, because it makes the trade visible. Would you rather show strangers that you are doing well, or quietly build a life where you do not need to ask anyone else's permission? That is the actual question behind many spending choices. Now let me tell you something else that becomes very dangerous around this stage comparison. When you were broke, comparison hurt, but it was simpler. You knew you were not playing in certain leagues. Once you hit 100,000, you enter a more psychologically toxic zone. You begin to look around at peers and think, I am doing well enough now to deserve some of what they have. That thought is poison because what others have is often financed, fragile, insecure, anxious, or built on assumptions you do not see. The visible life is a terrible standard. The invisible balance sheet matters more. I would rather be underestimated and structurally strong than admired and financially hollow. That is one of the few preferences I trust. Absolutely. If you can preserve that preference, you are much harder to manipulate because the culture is always trying to turn your progress into consumption. That is how the system profits. Your 100,000 becomes dealership gross margin, restaurant group revenue, luxury brand revenue, landlord revenue, vacation package revenue. The machine wants your first real capital base to become someone else's sales quarter. I would rather it become your future. Now, because human beings are not robots, I am not telling you never to celebrate. Celebrate, but celebrate like an adult who understands the difference between a reward and a reset. A modest trip, a thoughtful dinner, a day off, a gift to someone who mattered in the process, fine. The point is not to become joyless. The point is not to let the celebration permanently alter the recurring cost structure of your life. Recurring costs are what determine whether compounding is fed or starved. One-time pleasures are much less dangerous than permanent upgrades. That distinction is one of the most useful in personal finance. The next $100,000 does come faster, but only if the machine is protected. That is the key insight. People hear and then misuse. They hear that the next 100 comes faster and conclude the acceleration is automatic. It is conditional. Money starts helping you more once the base gets larger. Yes, that is mathematics, but mathematics still needs behavior. If the account reaches 100,000 and then the owner turns around and raises spending so much that future contributions shrink or disappear, then the compounding engine is starved right when it was finally getting useful. That is why some people stay stuck at the same level for years. It is not because the market failed them. It is because they converted what could have become acceleration into evidence that they could finally relax. That is the costliest misunderstanding of all. And it often arrives disguised as healthy balance. That is why you must be precise with language. There is nothing wrong with enjoying life. There is a great deal wrong with translating every sign of progress into more monthly obligation. One expands your experience. The other shrinks your freedom. Those are not the same thing. At this point, I want to address the temptation to become clever. The investor who finally builds 100,000 often starts believing he needs to graduate from boring investing into something more advanced. Maybe now he should start day trading. Maybe now he should pick the next giant winner. Maybe now he should move into options, crypto, private deals, or whatever currently allows ordinary people to fantasize about unusual returns. I do not like that instinct. A person who built the first 100 through discipline should not suddenly start behaving like a gambler just because the account finally has enough weight to feel exciting. The broad market is still your friend. Low-cost funds are still your friend. Automatic contributions are still your friend. Taxes still matter. Patience still matters. The playbook does not become obsolete because the first part worked. The person who wants to become fancy too early is usually just bored. Boredom is expensive in markets. You do not need more complexity. You need more time. That is all. Give the machine more years, add to it, protect it. And if you insist on having a speculation sleeve because you are curious or human or a little restless, keep it small enough that it cannot injure the structure. 5% may be less enough to satisfy the urge, not enough to threaten the future. The future deserves the larger vote. Now, let me return to Charlie S. Point one last time. because it contains more than people first hear. The first 100,000 is the hardest. Why? Because it is built before the machine helps much. What he also implied, though he did not need to spell it out, is that after the first 100, your real enemy is no longer only difficulty. It is self-sabotage. The hill is still there, but now gravity is beginning to help instead of only resist. So what do? You keep your foot on the gas. You do not pull over to admire the car. You keep going. Most financial lives are not ruined by one big event. They are softened, diluted, and delayed by little indulgences that keep capital from becoming force. I would rather the capital become force. That is the difference between looking successful and becoming independent. One is theatrical, one is structural. Structure is what I trust. So if you are sitting at 100,000 now, here is what I want you to remember. Do not confuse a milestone with completion. Do not let lifestyle inflation steal what discipline built. Kill expensive debt. Build real reserves. Use your tax shelters. Own productive enterprise at low cost. Think in decades, not moods. Know what the money is for. Ignore how wealth is performed by others. And above all, understand that 6 figures is not the end of the hard part. It is the beginning of the part that matters most, because now your money can begin working, but only if you stop interrupting it, leave it alone, feed it, protect it, and years from now, you will look back and realize that 100,000 was never the finish line at all. It was the moment your future first became visible, and the moment you had to decide whether you would build on it or spend it away.